currently. So, without further ado, let me introduce you to Ms. Sheena Rodriguez. Please give her a warm round of applause.
Thank you guys so much for inviting me to your great group. I'm here actually in the area. I have a lot of family in kind of the Spring area and stuff, so in the Woodlands area, so I'm very familiar kind of with this area, but thank you guys so much for the invitation. I don't know if I'm dynamic. Hopefully you guys don't fall asleep, especially when we start getting to like legislation stuff and the bills. It can be kind of snoozing, I know, but a little bit about myself, because I get asked this all the time, is like, how does because usually when we talk about border, right, you're going to see the top brass, you know, you're going to see men, not that there's anything wrong with men, don't get me wrong, but a lot of times people ask, how did you get involved in this? And really, honestly, it's been a wild ride over the last 2 years. If somebody would have told me even 3 years ago that I would have been doing what I'm doing now, I would have thought that y'all were crazy. But honestly, it kind of makes sense. So a little bit of a background. I'm just a mom. I'm just a homeschooling mom. Prior to about 3 years ago, I was never really into the politics side of things. I was always on the activism side. I served for several years at a pro-life center as a volunteer counselor in Irving, Texas, when it was still Mid-Cities Pregnancy Center, and we had an Irving location. And actually what I began to see then, and this was years ago, I had 2 teenagers, this was when my children were little, I began to become intimately kind of aware of some of the different things that were going on, and kind of scratching my head, and particularly with immigration, things such as, because women would come into us, we were right next to a Planned Parenthood, who eventually did close their doors, thankfully. But a lot of the times women would come in to our doors thinking that they were going into Planned Parenthood's doors, strategically placed, I know. And I would get a lot of women, I had a number of clients that were actually forced arranged marriages, looking for abortions because of their abusive husbands. A lot of them from the Middle Eastern countries. And at that time, and you know, as your counselor, obviously you can't talk about things, and a lot of them are grown women, so it's not like I could report it necessarily, right? But at that time, my mind was blown, because when I would talk about generalities of these cases, of these clients that I was seeing in Irving, Texas, people were like, yeah, no, that doesn't happen. Now, mind you, my family's Puerto Rican, okay? My family's from Puerto Rico. So my great-grandparents is what would have been considered an arranged marriage. They married when they were like 13, right? But it was different. The women that I was seeing were from very abusive types of situations. So anyways, and then seeing the other element to it, because we are Puerto Rican, a lot of the marriages into our family, were legal immigrants that were married into our family. So again, kind of been cognizant, and I have family that actually had owned an immigration law firm. And when my kids were younger, my sister-in-law was like, hey, you write really good. And I'm like, okay. And so she's like, can you come and help kind of write some of the testimonies for people who are applying for citizenship or their LPRs, things of that nature. And I remember then, again, this is a long time ago, I remember then hearing some of the stories coming straight from their mouths as I'm writing up their testimonies of the rape and the abuse that they endured, not in their own countries, but along the route. And I remember then thinking to myself, why is nothing being done about this? Like, why is anybody telling them, hey, don't come? And I couldn't understand it then. So then, in being in the pro-life area, if you will, that's always been my heart and my politics, if you will, have always been geared towards the pro-life arena for obvious reasons. That's where I started off at, right? I was in marched several times there in Dallas, where Roe versus Wade started, and actually this was my first year going to DC for the March for Life, and it was a full circle moment for me because, of course, this being the first year at the steps of the Supreme Court after the overturning of Roe versus Wade. So, but when I felt the calling to get involved into the border, without kind of sounding like a crazy person, the way that God speaks to me is I have a lot of those Jonah moments. And he puts it in me where he's like, do this. And I'm like, that's kind of crazy. Why would I want to do that, right? Like, why would I want to go to the border? Because honestly, and you guys know how large and vast Texas is. It's almost as if we're big enough to be our own country. You know, I had never been, even though I had lived back, I was born here I was born in Dallas, but lived all up and down the East Coast and came back in 2000 and graduated high school here in North Texas. But prior to that, I had never been further south than San Antonio. But it's not that hard to believe, again, when you understand how big Texas is. I never had any desire. My husband is a first-generation Mexican-American. He has family that lives down there. I just never had a desire to go. I want to go to like Iceland, you know, to go see, in like Alaska. That's kind of my stuff. So I just never been further south. So when God put it in me, and I thought it was nuts. I'm like, why would I want to go to the border? But he puts it in me where I can't eat, I can't sleep, I can't think, I can't do anything until I obey. And it's so overwhelming to the point where when I have my Jonah moments, I can't not obey. Because it's such a thorn in my side, if you will. And the very first trip over 2 years ago was down there to the Laredo sector. We got there, it took a long time for us to get there because everything that could go wrong went wrong. Flat tires, you name it, traffic, right? And so it was near midnight, close to midnight by the time that we pulled up there, and I remember I was petrified. I didn't know what to expect. I mean, you hear the rhetoric, right? You hear the rhetoric from both sides, because both sides do it, let's be honest. Both sides do it, okay? And that's also one of the other driving factors, was that something about us Texans, right? I want to go see for myself. Don't tell me what's going on. Let me see for myself. It's kind of in our DNA a little bit, right? So I had no idea really what to expect. I was a little scared, a little nervous, of course, but when I got there, we step out, and the moment, I kid you not, the moment that I open my door, and I step out and we're at a park. This is a public park right across from a shopping center, a mall. And I'm looking into Nuevo Laredo, and there's a pod of about 60 men from China, by the way, to one Border Patrol agent. And that Border Patrol agent that didn't know me from anywhere turns around and looks at me and says, I need help, we're being invaded. That was my very first experience, and all of that fear that I had was gone in an instant. And I began crying. And if you know me, yeah, of course, I mean, I'm a female, right? I cry when it's a little bit emotional, but I'm not like an infant crier. You ask my husband, though.
How long ago was that?
That was over 2 years ago. That was March, a little over 2 years ago, March 2021. Right after, like a month after Biden was sworn into office. Right after that had happened, and I'd seen this, it switched to tears of rage and anger. And so, because what I saw was my children's future going down the drain. And from that moment, and it was funny because I remember my husband saying then, like, oh, but it's just like one thing, right? Like, it's just one time. I'm like, yeah, babe, totally. Been to the border nearly 30 times in just the last 2 years. And when I say in the border, I'm not just saying along the cushy part, along the, the wall, like a lot of the politicians like to do to take photo ops. I've been in the reeds, on the ground, with coyotes that are two-legged, and seeing for myself the carnage that's inflicted upon our state. And so that's kind of, and to me, what God has really, truly, and honestly divulged to me throughout this is saying, this is a pro-life issue. What I began to see was the exploitation of human beings on all sides. No one is winning. You hear a lot, from again, the rhetoric on both sides. The poor migrants. I can tell you personally, over 95% of them are coming for economic reasons. I've documented this. To, the Texans that think that the answer is to just start shooting over the border. And my answer to them is, you want to know who's going to be there to receive those bullets? Innocent children, like the one that I got this band from. So whether or not Texans and Americans want to realize it, we are at war. We are actually being invaded. And I'm not saying that we're at war with just one country. We are at war with cartel operatives who are well-funded, well-organized, that are using and exploiting human beings from over 170 countries to infiltrate our sovereign state and our sovereign country. So when I've seen for myself and people, try to push back, including Republicans, and say, yeah, but Sheena, like, an invasion is like, tanks coming over the border, people in military, guard coming over. And as the daughter, I've never served, I'm the daughter of a Vietnam veteran, one who did not die in the many years that he served over there in Vietnam, but years later by Agent Orange-induced cancer. So I know full well what our own government is willing to do to our own people. But, again, we are being invaded by what I believe is one of the #1 existential threats to your lives and to your family's lives, which are the transnational cartel organizations. So when we talk about the invasions, though, right, we talk about there has to be casualties. So that's one of the things that people ask me, well, what are the casualties, right? Because again, what people have in their mind of what an invasion is, they think there has to be casualties. So let's talk about that. Over 1,000 migrants, illegal aliens, I'm going to use that term interchangeably. It didn't matter, one and the same. Okay, we're not going to care about verbiage today. Over 1,000, and that's just what we know of that have died along their route. That is a photo from a friend that owns a ranch that's had several dead bodies over the last 2 years on her farm. So, and again, so much so that refrigerated morgues have had to be brought down to rural Texas counties, to their sheriff's office, to hold the bodies of the individuals, including children, that have perished along the route, on Texas soil, by the way. I was there in Eagle Pass. I spent a lot of time in the Del Rio sector, particularly Kinney County, learning from people like Brian Smith, who is the Kinney County attorney down there, Sheriff Brad Coe. I've learned a lot down there. So I spent a lot in the Del Rio sector, which Eagle Pass is in. And when they initially, I remember my colleague of mine, Auden Cabello, who was a reporter, highly suggest you follow him, Ben Berkwam, my brother from another mother and father Anthony Guedo over there with Border Network News. These are the people that I've been blessed to get connected with, and how I've been able to get into these areas, right? Because you need to know where you're going, right? But again, when Auden first was talking, he's the first person, I believe, that had actually broke the story in Eagle Pass, where shallow graves were being built, or dug, in Eagle Pass at the local cemetery there, and PVC pipe crosses were being put up for John and Jane and baby does, which is because of all of the illegal aliens that were being drug out of the river, perishing on rural farms, things like that. Over 100,000 Americans, of course, I think it's up to like 300 a day is the last statistic that I've heard, that are dying from intentional fentanyl poisonings. It's intentional. A lot of these young children, again, I have 2 teens. Let's be honest, we don't have any, I think I see one young face over there. God bless you, okay? I have a senior, an 18-year-old, and a 15-year-old daughter. The prefrontal cortex is not fully developed. They don't always make the right decisions, okay? I was a teen once, I remember. I made some really bad decisions. Thank goodness social media wasn't around. Right? Okay? But now these kids can't even afford to make stupid choices, because it can literally cost them their lives. They think that they're getting a Xanax, something along those lines, something to help them stay up and study, and it's intentional poisons. You can't even be a kid. You just can't. That's where we're at. 17 Border Patrol agents have committed suicide over the last 2 years. I'm friends with a number of them. It's personal. I've been down there, and it's not just, I want to tell you, it's not just the Border Patrol agents. It's also a Texas Guardsman. I've been down there in the Del Rio sector when a few of them have taken their lives, or when accidents have happened. When the one gentleman jumped into the river to try and save what turned out to be drug smugglers. I was there, in the area. It's not just Border Patrol agents. And of course, tens of thousands of missing unaccompanied minors. Now I'm going to tell you, I told Bill here earlier, I said, you guys are actually going to get the presentation that I typically give to those living along the border. Okay? So you guys are in I guess in a little bit of a special treat, because typically when I'm talking to a group in North Texas, I'm going to kind of give them some different key points. When you get closer to the border, obviously they know what a bailout is. They live it intimately. But one of the main things, because of where we are right now, that I want to try to spend a little bit more time on focusing on with you guys tonight, being in Harris County, is the trafficking of the unaccompanied minors. So again, I'm not going to go over too much stats. After a while, they just become redundant. But I'm here to tell you that every single one of those numbers that you see from the stats that CBP gives, or Mayorkas gives, or whoever gives it, a politician gives, that's a person, that's an individual. Like, that's a real person, right? And when you talk about the impact then, the negative impact that trickles down of over 5 million in just 2 years alone, 2 fiscal years alone, and that's just what we know of. Even the known gotaways, over 1 million known gotaways. That means that they, basically a known gotaway are those that they know have gotten away. They've been pinged on a camera, game cameras, or they've been able to track them, and they have an idea of how many they slid through the cracks. We haven't even begun to talk about, and there's no way to be able to quantify how many we have no idea have crossed over. And over 350, I think we're up to about 356 known unaccompanied minors that have been apprehended at our southwestern border. So again, let's talk about the exploitation of children. There's what I would categorize as a mother as 2 different groups of children that I've encountered and experienced and interviewed along our Texas border and in Arizona. You've got your 17-year-old males and females. Let me put it back. Let's go back just a little bit. There's a huge difference between a 15-year-old, like my 15-year-old, and from America, that's been born and raised here in the United States, and one that is coming from, let's say, El Salvador. There's a lot of children, what we consider minors, that have more tattoos and gang affiliations than we could ever imagine. Because in their home country, they're considered adults. Because in their home country, the poverty or the situation is so bad that from a very young age, at 14, 13, they know how to operate guns and they're committing crimes. So some of these children that I personally encountered are ones that, they have more tattoos than interest in teddy bears, if you will. On the flip side, I have encountered a number of children who are younger, who when I personally have spoken to them and interviewed them and spent time with them, like I watched them cross over illegally into Texas on rafts, guided by coyotes, and then have the opportunity to spend a little bit of time with them and ask them questions. And I have concerns when a 10-year-old girl from Guatemala or Honduras, and I asked them, how does a 10-year-old come from Honduras or Guatemala by themselves? Who finances that? And I get asked all the time, why would parents send their 10-year-old? Well, number one, our policies are driving that. Yes, of course, there's, the renting of children. That's a very real thing, been long documented even before this administration. None of these things are new, but the incentivization is what we need to target. It's the policies, because prior to about 2014, unaccompanied minors just wasn't a thing. Because our policies were not driving them. By policies, I'm even speaking about even being admitted, like the Biden administration putting in Alejandro Mayorkas putting out MOAs or not MOAs, sorry, basically like field guidances and ordinances saying, well, if you arrive here to the United States with a child under 7 years old or younger, you're going to automatically be accepted. We're not going to push you away. Now, mind you, they're not doing DNA tests, they're not doing any real vetting. So, and fake families are a very real thing. Again, long documented, but what you can imagine is the fact that this is happening on a massive, unprecedented scale. These are issues with policies that both Republicans and Democrats have known for years. There was a congressional hearing back in 2016 by Congressman Rob Portman detailing, because of the trafficking of children that were being forced to go work in dangerous egg farms. They knew what the problem is. It's not new. So imagine these issues, but on a massive, unprecedented scale, like we've never seen before. And your taxpayer dollars are helping to fund it. Our taxpayer dollars are literally helping to put innocent children who have no control over what is happening to them into the hands, white glove service, of transnational criminal organizations. I recently had 2 whistleblowers on my podcast. You can find it on my Substack. On there, on the back, you'll see one talking about a Substack and an NGO. That QR code is going to get you to my Substack, where you guys can read the articles, watch the podcast and everything. But on there, on that Substack and on my social media and also on the website and anywhere that you can find podcasts, Secure the Border podcast is on there. I recently had 2 whistleblowers, Tara Rodas and Aaron Stevenson. Tara Rodas was from HHS, Aaron Stevenson was from DHS. So HHS is Health and Human Services, and DHS, of course, is Department of Homeland Security. There were whistleblowers from inside. HHS and ORR, which is the Office of Refugee Resettlement. HHS and ORR are the ones that are charged, if you will, with the care of unaccompanied minors. So I'm just trying to make sure, because sometimes I get into these acronyms and I want to make sure, because when you guys hear these things from experts, now I want to make sure that you guys have an understanding of kind of what we're talking about here. So I have 2 whistleblowers on there. We're again from HHS and DHS talking about exactly that. She was inside of the facilities. She believed that she was there to help reunify, because you guys remember President Trump taking away the kids in the cages, and you're taking away the families, the kids from their families, and he knew, President Trump knew and understood that these children a lot of them were being used. And it was the ACLU, again, our taxpayer dollars, that helped to fight President Trump to say, no, don't you know, that's just racist. You can't, how dare you try to actually make sure that this child is actually related to this adult, right? It's quite the contrary. But anyways, long story short, it's happening. It's real. It's happening on a massive scale. And Project Veritas was actually the first ones that I had seen with not 1, not 2, but I believe 3 or 4 different drops of information involving these 2 whistleblowers and a few others later on, a few other media sources as well, but verifying recently what was happening under the Biden regime. And so again, even here locally, several alarms have been raised. Of course, Axios a while back had reported that the Biden administration then admitted to losing up to 40% or 1 in 3 of the unaccompanied minors. Like, just poof, gone, have no idea what's happening to them. They're just gone. Houston PD raised alarms, saying these children, where are they? We know that these unaccompanied minors have been released here, and they're like, because they're getting calls. I had a meeting with an NGO not too long ago. Actually, I just wrote the 3rd Substack that's on there that you can find, and you're going to get more information about what's happening with these facilities and some of these NGOs that I've been trying to battle here in our great state. But we kind of go into some of even the issues that even the NGOs are stressing concerns about with HHS. So there's a lot of details in there, but Houston PD's even been raising alarms. And a lot of these NGOs who, you know, at least the ones who are working, they know what's happening. They know that these kids are calling the HHS hotline, talking about that they're being trafficked for labor trafficking or abused or what have you, and HHS simply they're just not calling back. They're just not calling back. They're not following up because after 30 days, their hands are done. They think, well, we don't have anything. We don't have to worry about these UACs anymore. They're out of our custody. And again, it's happening with your taxpayer dollars. So Houston PD, even the NGOs are making calls to their local PDs or to the sheriffs going, hey, we know that this is happening. We're supposed to report this to HHS. HHS isn't doing anything. And of course, HHS and DHS is not releasing information to the local PDs and to the local sheriffs about the whereabouts of these children where even the local law enforcement can follow up. It's kind of hard to believe that it's not intentional. I think it's just taking a little bit of time. So, and here in Harris County, let's see, maybe I'm just, here in Harris County alone, maybe it'll come around. Here in Harris County alone, in just the last 2 fiscal years, I think it's going. All right. And we'll touch on that here in just a minute. But per HHS, per their own data, Harris County alone has received over 18,000 unaccompanied minors in the last 2 fiscal years. Well, from FY21 to current. So if you do the math, and even though I said I'm a homeschooler, look, math has never been my strong suit. I pass that responsibility on. But even by their own statistics, if we apply those own statistics of 1 in 3 or 40%, that's roughly very possibly over 5,000 UACs that have been released right here, that very possibly could be trafficked using your taxpayer dollars. In a county, by the way, that is the #1 for sex trafficking. That doesn't make everyone's skin crawl. So again, you know, how does a child travel alone from Honduras to La Jolla, Texas? Well, I'm going to tell you what a lot of the children told me was that they were told by women and NGOs operating along the route that as long as they came to the United States, they would help cover the cost. They were also told, according to, I can only go by what the children themselves have told me. They were also told by complete strangers in these bodegas or like warehouses or by these NGOs who their sponsors were going to be. And when I would see for myself all these little pieces of paper with their supposed sponsors' phone numbers, and I asked, so like they'd be like, oh, like I remember there was one girl who said, I'm gonna go live with my father. I was told that this is who my father is. And I said, well, do you know your father? No, I've never spoken to him. 10 years old. 10 years old. Traveled by herself. And then many of them told me different stories about being shoved into cars, into buses, into 18-wheelers, and just brought along, sleeping on the streets, or being put in these warehouses in the bodegas, what they call like bodegas. Some of them with armed cartel members. Again, I have all of this stuff documented. I cannot, there's no way for me to substantiate their claims, but I can only go by what they're telling me. And this is coming from their own mouths. So again, a lot of the NGOs that are operating in Central America and across the world, the UN is the largest NGO. The United States is the #1 funder for the UN. And then you've got several different NGOs. Now here in the United States, you might hear, of course, Catholic Charities is a big one that comes to people's minds. But again, as you guys just saw, there's not a denomination that I'm aware of that doesn't have their hands into the care of being generous, the care of unaccompanied minors in particular, or refugees or migrants. And a lot of them use, again, our taxpayer dollars, including down there you have the UN, who is literally outside and inside of the Darien Gap. I know Ben Berkwam and Oscar Blue were just talking about that. I was on a Twitter space last night with Michael Young, who is a war correspondent. He's there in the Darien Gap all the time. I greatly respect all of these individuals. The IOM, who again is funded by the UN, help funded by the UN, they hand out rape kits. It's true. I have seen it. I have seen Texas soil, and I've documented it, where used condoms are on our soil here in Texas and in Arizona. Condoms that are still in packages, birth control pills. I've seen it. So I can tell you, I can personally verify, even though they're saying that that's happening over there in Central America, it's here. When I was in Arizona, in Yuma, Arizona, the part that we were in right there by the wall, and that was kind of the video that I was hoping was going to work, but it's okay. Some of the agents there, because I was there for 3 nights, and literally thousands of people in just those 3 nights that I encountered. And the agents, even during the day, had warned and said several times, and you know, we were together with a group, I say group, it was like 3 of us, but had also warned, like, do not go over there. That's the Indian reservation. Yes, that's American soil, but I have witnessed women getting raped over there, children getting raped over there, again on American soil. And my Anthony Guido with Border Network News was in a prior visit. Anthony was out there, and there was a woman who had just came up. All of it was on live streams. Just come across the border wall, because they just walk around. The wall just ends, and they just walk around, right? With a stab wound, and her clothes like torn. So again, don't think, the reason for why I'm saying this is, don't think that just these atrocities just happen along the route. They're happening right here, in Texas, in Arizona, in the United States. So again, the children, from what they told me as well, was that they were aided by NGOs in conjunction, if you will, with cartel along the route here to the United States. So I want to get kind of fast track. Again, when people ask, like, why, these are some of the articles that I've written when people ask why. I struggle to come up with any other logical reason than money. I've encountered so many on the left, the open border left, especially out there in Austin. Some that flat out, one that was very confrontational last week, which is why I took a break this week, because I was like, you know what, sometimes I just need to like not people for a while after. It was a very rough week last week at the Capitol, and I had one who was very upset with me, asking me when I simply asked the question, because they had bussed in over 300 from their open border crowds, and it was maybe 5 of us. And I stood up at one point because so much just not factually correct information, right? Like, even if we just don't ideologically agree, at least like distort facts, right? Like, give me something here to work with. It's just so blatantly just not even factual information at all, and I had to say something. So I took my little 2 minutes and I said, I want to speak. And I took my 2 little minutes and I simply asked the question, as they were just shooting down everything, every bill, so many of them that were good. Every bill, you know, you're racist, you're a bigot, you're this, you're that, you know, all this stuff. I'm so used to that. And I simply asked, how many? How many is enough? Quantify it for me. How many individuals is enough to cross over here? How many people dying from drugs and fentanyl overdoses is enough? How many unknown terrorists crossing into our sovereign state and our sovereign land? How many of that is enough? How many people being exploited and killed in the gap and along the route, and women being raped, and children having 60-something DNAs inside of her? How many of that is enough? Quantify it for me, please. Before reasonable, level-headed people come together and say enough is enough. How many? And because I simply said that, I was asked, how dare I speak against our people? Because my last name is Rodriguez. So apparently, people with Hispanic background can't want secure borders. The very same people who flat out refused to recognize and looked me straight in the eyes and said that people's houses, that Texans' houses were not being knocked out at 3 a.m. in the morning by 20 men, in rural South Texas, that wasn't happening. It's all just orderly, don't you know? The same woman, by the way, who also said that, well, how do you know that they're terrorists? Who puts them on that list? It's law enforcement, and law enforcement can distort reality. Like, these people do not live in reality. This is what we're up against. And I'll tell you this, when we start getting into the legislation, what you guys can do, they are there. These open border crowds, the same ones that are funded by the George Soros, the WEF, because when people ask why, in addition to just the money, when they ask why, as a homeschooler who loves history, what has history shown us? How does a society collapse? What is one of the main factors? Mass immigration. How do you bring a country to its knees when we are facing record inflation, when our enemies across the world are laughing at us? And I have so many people that have said, oh, but it's just the Mexican, you're just against. Do you know how many people I have seen and documented and interviewed and spoken to from Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Georgia, and I'm not talking about the state, Pakistan, India, China, Russia, Ukraine, Africa? These are not just Mexicans coming over that border. And I have the receipts to prove it. So it is more than just the money. I believe that this is orchestrated, in my opinion, and I'm allowed to have my opinion, because I've seen it with my own two eyes. There's no logical explanation as to why this should be allowed, any of this should be allowed to happen. Other than, of course, you're trying to bring the United States to its knees and fast-track communism. So let's talk about some of the things that you guys can do. On there, let's try and talk about now you know some of the issues, right? So let's talk about what are some of the solutions, because a lot of the times people get overwhelmed, right? It is overwhelming. Then what can I do about it? What can a little old homeschooling mom like me do about it? What can you do about it? So one of the things that we've done is, for months, I tried to find a legislative sponsor at the very beginning of the ADA session, asking for the launch of an investigation, a state-level investigation into the trafficking of unaccompanied minors in the state of Texas. When I first called our Attorney General's office, I was given a specialist. The specialist told me, you do not have the right to ask for such of an investigation. And I said, okay, being the person that I am, I'm like, so tell me what I can do, right? Who does have that right? And I understand, I get it, it's a politics, right? Because I'm just some crazy mom, right? Like, okay. And they said the governor, I tried the governor's office. A DA, a lot of the DAs aren't exactly our friends right now. And the state legislators, and I was like, challenge accepted. I'm there all the time, I got this. Actually, it took me a while, but I'm proud to say that we have nearly 20. I did find a legislative sponsor for the letter, and a copy of the contents of the letter is in that packet, it's at the front. I will point out that the New York Times articles, when I started on this, had those New York Times, the two pieces that have come out from the New York Times, that has just been earth-shattering and across party lines. That was not in, it wasn't available. That wasn't out when I started this. So, but This has now bipartisan support. So I'm very thankful, including a state representative from Harris County. So I do have on my Substack that I just released at 2 a.m. this morning, I do have the list of the representatives that have signed on to it. So I don't know, who's your state representative and your state senator?
There's several, Bettencourt, Colcourse are here.
Colcourse, Colcourse and you?
And Bettencourt.
Bettencourt? Bettencourt has not signed on. Okay, so that's one of the things that you guys can do is ask them to sign on to the sponsored letter. You guys have the contents of it. The actual official letter is obviously in Representative Stan Kitzman's office. And hopefully soon we might have a press conference before that letter does get sent over to the AG's office. Florida, I want to point out something. Again, this was just recently. Florida has actually done, of course, Florida keep getting ahead of us on like everything. They have actually done it without a crazy mom trying to fuel, the drive for it to be done. They have done a state level investigation. Their grand jury just released the findings of their investigation. A lot of cases that were cited right here in the state of Texas in their findings. That was back on like the 29th. So again, we're simply asking, I'm simply asking, Representative Kitzman is simply asking, and the legislators so far that have signed on, that the same type of investigation be done here in the state of Texas. We hope, I know that there's also been calls for that on the congressional level, so hopefully any type of investigation, if and when does get done on the congressional level, the federal level, whatever the state's find can hopefully aid with that. So that's one of the things that you guys can do. A quick few little things. There are different things that you can do on your city, county, and of course the state level. And I'll rush through it because how much time do I have? I'm sure okay. On the city level, I want to talk about some of the things. Become a watchdog. This is one of the most important things that you can do is actually on the city and county level, because people will be like, well, Sheena, I can't go to the border with you. I'm like, you'd be crazy if you really wanted to, number one, and number two, you don't have to. We need people taking up the mantle and becoming watchdogs and becoming activists with the border-related issues, because when we're talking, yes, a lot of the things that we talked about today is actually related to the physical border, right? But I can tell you the problems do not begin, nor do they end at the banks of the Rio Grande. Everything from our taxes to our schools, our hospitals. What are the two driving forces to your local property taxes? Anybody know? Your schools and your health care, right? These kids gotta go somewhere. If you even just look at just the unaccompanied minors alone that I just cited, straight from HHS, 18,000, the average cost of a child in the public school system is about 10 grand, give or take. And assuming, because if they're an unaccompanied minor, you have to assume then, we're talking reasonably assume, that they're school-age children, right? Otherwise they wouldn't be qualified as a minor. So just multiply 10,000 times 18,000. And that's just the UACs. That's not including the ones that we don't know about. That's not including the family units, right? That has a cost. So when your school systems and your local ISD starts asking for bonds, all of a sudden these bonds are on those ballots. Why do you think they're asking for it? Because there's a huge influx of people that are now sitting in your public schools that weren't there before. They have to try and accommodate them somehow. So, in the city of Denton, another reason why this is important, pay attention to what's happening, what your city council is doing. The city of Denton, earlier last year, passed an ordinance allowing for non-citizens to run for local office. You can't make this stuff up. How many people do you think were there testifying against this?
About 5. Oh, against you?
No, against this ordinance.
Oh, none.
Yeah, none, zero, zilch. Not one person. There were several people testifying in favor of it, not one testifying against it. The city of Arlington, around the same time, also passed an ordinance making it very difficult for property owners to ask for the legal status of their renters. These are what I like to call sanctuary city type policies.
Yeah.
Our cities are helping and I'm telling you, because I know this firsthand, they know what is being said. The people crossing over that border, they're not stupid at all. At all. and they are very well attuned. Every single one of them has a phone. They listen. Literally, when CBP 1 was announced officially by President Biden, I kid you not, I was down there in the Del Rio sector. That morning, just a handful of hours later, CBP 1 is the app that is being used to fast track where people can apply, to fraudulently claim asylum, because it's just, even the use of CBP 1 is just not, the way that they're using it is just, none of it's legal. Literally none of it is legal, okay? Anyways, I digress. The morning after, not even 24 hours after, I encountered a huge group, one family, large family unit from Cuba, who said that they were waiting on the other side of the border. They heard President Biden speak. Of course, they didn't say President. I do, because I don't acknowledge him as president. And they said, well, what do you think is going to happen? We heard Biden speak last night, so we decided now is the time to come. What do you think is going to happen? And I looked and I said, I have this all on camera. And I said, are you talking about the CBP 1? And he goes, yes. Do you think I'll be able to stay? I kid you not. So I say this because verbiage matters. Anytime Democrats or Republicans alike, I don't care because there's a lot of them, Tony Gonzalez in particular, that they mention DACA, that they mention amnesty, anything of that verbiage, that is sending the green light. We'll leave the lights on for you and we'll pay you along the way. That's what they hear. So when your city is promoting ordinances like this that is favorable to them, you're literally flashing that welcome sign. So I cannot overstate how important city and county level is. And the same thing with your police. Your chief of police, your sheriffs, yes, but even your chief of police there in Fort Worth. I have great respect for officers, and we have the Fort Worth Police Department has done a very great job. I met with the chief of police from Fort Worth a while back, who flat out told me that he was not going to ask for the legal status of those who were committing crimes. I said, why not? Like, literally, the state of Texas has passed legislation stating that you can do exactly that, which is important for several reasons, by the way. And I'm not just talking about, like, you're just randomly, everybody wants to say, oh, but you're promoting all the stuff, the rhetoric that they say. Oh, you're promoting, like, everyone to be pulled over and okay, whatever. Like, everyone's a racist. Let me tell you, there's nothing racist about wanting safe communities. There's nothing racist about wanting safe schools and sovereign, safe, secure borders. There's nothing racist about that. There's just not. And don't let anybody tell you anything different. But the idea, that we're just, even our chiefs of police are not even going to bother to collect this data, which is important for several reasons, is mind-blowing. So have those conversations with your local PDs. Are you tracking the legal status of the crimes that are being committed? Ask them. Have those hard conversations. And if not, ask them why not. Maybe they don't know. Maybe they're not aware that there's state legislation that helps them to be able to do exactly that. County level actions, of course, go back. County level actions. One of the biggest things that I hope and pray, we had legislation, 2 bills that were filed, one by Frederick Frazier that I had brought to him and was filed, another one by Nate Sussline, who is a representative from my area, encouraging the expansion of the 287G program. In a quick nutshell, for the sake of time, 287G is basically your really bad dudes that have been tried and convicted of really bad crimes. I'm talking your your gangbangers, your drug dealers, your child rapists, okay, that are sitting in your county jails, that then there's a contract with ICE. You have several deputies from your sheriff's department that go to about a 2-week training. They're deputized with the same authorities as ICE agents. And then when those individuals, those violent criminals, have served their time, instead of being re-released right back into our communities, they're hightailed it, they get a one-way ticket back home to their home countries. That's it. We have roughly about 22 counties or so out of 254 that have the 287G implemented. Harris County, by the way, used to be one of them. But when y'all got your new sheriff, your Biden-installed sheriff, that was literally one of the first things that he did was reverse the 287G from Harris County.
Garcia or Gonzalez?
Whichever one the current one is. I haven't
Well, it was
checked.
actually for him, but okay.
Okay, all right.
Both of them.
Yeah.
Both of them?
Yeah.
I really, I mean, I'm gonna, forgive me, I'm always really bad with names as it is, so,
You'll trust me,
yeah.
let's vote.
Okay. So anyway, so the 287G, once hopefully the tides shift, we're hoping to expand that program. There's several left-leaning organizations, open border crowds, that is their sole purpose, is to reverse the 287G program across the United States. I'm hoping to be that one little on our side that's trying to implement. I mean, it's common sense. Again, you're not talking about those who are just like running a red light or, you know, like stole like a candy bar. These are people who rape children. I mean, why ever make, none of it makes sense. So declaring an invasion, I have on the county level. Being in Tarrant County, I can honestly say, thank God that we now have an actual Republican for our county judge. Tim O'Hare, Judge Tim O'Hare, which I'm so excited about. Tarrant County, of course, is the last red Metroplex county in the state of Texas. But still, even then, our politics, it's not so easy to get things through, right? So even if your county politics, so your county commissioners, and by declaration of invasion, basically, some counties we have, I believe over 40 now, counties that have either declared an invasion or recognized an invasion or passed a resolution basically showing support for our governors, for Operation Lone Star, and for everything that we've been working on legislatively, saying, you know, that this is unprecedented times. We are being invaded by the criminal cartel organizations. We support our law enforcement across the state and Governor Abbott by all means to protect the sovereignty of Texas. I have several examples on the website, securetheborder.us, under the Take Action tab. And so just even passing that, if you can't get it done through your county commissioners because the politics for whatever reason won't allow, I will say that in Tarrant County, I passed a resolution. I am a precinct chair there. We unanimously passed a resolution under the Tarrant County GOP. Again, this is all an effort to show the federal government that we are taking a stand. That every single one of our 254 counties are being impacted in some way, shape, or form by this intentional border crisis, and that we are having to do what we never should have to do, and we support the unprecedented to be done in response. So that's another thing that you guys can do on the local level. And then of course, on my favorite is out-of-state capital. Fight with me out there in the state capital. Like I said, the Open Borders crowd, they show up. They are well-funded. They have a party every single time. I kid you not. There was at least 300 of them last week. Yeah, they're well-funded, well-organized. That's one thing that our side lacks tremendously. We are not well-funded. We are not or I'm completely self-funded.
Are we well organized though?
Apparently not.
That's a whole other conversation. But there's several really good bills. Last session, during the 87th, it was not cool. It was like me and Brent Smith from Kinney County, screaming at the top of our lungs, saying, do something. I brought in letters into offices, Democrats and Republicans alike, demanding different actions from their constituents. I literally went around Texas, especially in South Texas, getting signed letters from their constituents, brought it into their offices and say they want you to do something, right? These are from your constituents, they want you to do something. The only thing that they passed was appropriations. This session, however, it's really cool to talk about the border. And it's very prudent. Everyone's coming out with a fentanyl bill, everybody's coming out with a build the border wall bill or whatever. There are some, though, that are really good pieces of legislation, and so I do put out calls to action. If you can't even make it out there to Austin, again, I get it. I understand. For me, from DFW, it's about a 3-hour drive each way. It's taxing, it's a lot of time, not everybody can do that. But you guys can, sure as heck, give me 5 minutes out of your day to make a phone call, to send an email. That's all I'm asking. That's it. Just share the information. Even just sharing the information like, hey, this bill is coming up, or we need to call the State Affairs Committee, or we need to, like, the bill that I gave, I'm so thankful for, again, Representative Stan Kitzman, he's a freshman from the Colorado County, Austin County area. He's a rock star. I brought to him because of the facilities, the permanent facilities that are opening up in his district, attempting to house these UACs. Again, please subscribe to that Substack and you'll see my recent one kind of explaining, because that's another heads up, because that's something that is a city level action item, really, is they have to bring these proposals to the city council, okay? But anyways, read up on that. HB 5000 right now is our bill, simply attempting to say that if you're going to run a facility here in the state of Texas contracted by HHS, it's your license by the state. Novel concept, I know. Why is that important? Because it gives us the ability to attempt to regulate these facilities. Right now, these facilities that are attempting to open up in rural areas, you guys remember, I'm sure, Hurricane Harvey very well. Your resources were strapped, right? It was an emergency situation. And you guys have law enforcement, you guys have EMS, right? Hospital and healthcare workers. Imagine being in a rural county with only 4 ambulances for 1,000 square miles. And a disaster hits because you're sitting right next to the Colorado River, and all of a sudden everybody needs to be evacuated, and you don't even have the plans. You're sitting there as a county judge or the chief of police with only 3 or 4 deputies on your whole entire staff, and now all of a sudden you've got to evacuate not just your own citizens, but UACs that you just don't have in this facility that's opened up that you don't even know who's in there. You've never even been in there. You have no access to any information. How are you going to move them out? The responsibility is on them. This is strapping rural Texas even more. And this is going to be a problem, the opening of these HHS permanent facilities of unaccompanied minors. It's going to expand across rural Texas. Hear me well.
They're hidden.
They are. And so that's going to strap the resources even more. So real quick, I'll wrap it up. But again, I send out action items. If you can come up there to the Capitol with me when I put out a call to action to come testify. If not, give me 5 minutes, send emails, phone calls, stuff like that, okay? That's it. Alliance for State Texas is the 501c4. If you do make any donations, I apologize. It is not tax deductible, but it's there. And then that QR code will take you to our website, securetheborder.us, securetheborder.us. You can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Getter, YouTube. I mean, just about, I'm everywhere, but the main ones are securetheborder.us and the Substack.
Facebook and not
Nope.
Facebook?
Nope, absolutely, I call it Facebook. It's so, because it's all fake, so. Okay, yes. Do we have time for questions?
Yes.
We were in
All right, let's entertain some questions. Sheena?
I don't even know.
I'm listening.
Okay, do you happen to have a number as far as the kids that are in custody? Do we have that, or we haven't been able to track
The custody in HHS?
of all the kids that we've got in custody right now?
So that's gonna change pretty like daily, just about, and by the time that we get the numbers, those numbers are gonna be old by HHS. But if you're saying like how many children have actually, like unaccompanied minors that have been apprehended and then released to sponsors,
That we have.
that is over 220,000.
Wow.
The vast majority of which, by the way, have been released. Texas is the #1 of where, of course, these children have crossed into, and also the #1 of how many unaccompanied minors have been released to sponsors in a given state. And I will actually, really quick before I forget, I've been asked to go and testify in front of Congress next week. So on Wednesday of next week, I'll be testifying in front of the House Judiciary Subcommittee on Immigration Integrity regarding my experiences in the interviews with these children. So it's at 2 o'clock our time, assuming that all that stuff holds, and you'll probably find a lot of information during that testimony because it's only about the unaccompanied minors.
Prayers for you, sweetie.
Thank you. It's my first time going to Congress, so Wild ride.
Do you know anything about this legislation or program that, I guess it was added into somebody in the legislature related to the budget for a program, something like their state-funded border patrol and getting volunteers and deputizing people? And what's the chances of that passing? Is it just a budgetary thing or what is that?
So you're probably talking about the Border Protection Unit, which was part of HB 20. It's also been part of a few other bills, but especially HB 20. He wasn't going, none of it, I've actually read the legislation. It's not just taking volunteers and deputizing them. That's not what we're talking about.
Right.
There's certain criteria for law enforcement, military, things of that nature. I think it's been long standing. I think BPU was a really bad acronym for several reasons, mainly because we also have the Border Prosecution Unit, which is actually our taxpayer dollars helping to fund for the legal expenses of illegal aliens that are being charged under Operation Lone Star, OLS. So why ever in the world they would even choose BPU for both? I mean, like, it's just crazy. But for me, for Alliance for a Safe Texas, the way that the bill was currently written for that, I like the concept of it. I think that we do need our own border protection unit, but not called that. But it cannot be and should not be, in my opinion, under the purview and authorization of DPS. If it's going to exist, I believe that it needs to be its own entity, not under DPS. So yes, I've heard it, but
Another state agency then? Is that a whole separate?
like game wardens, for example, they're like the highest authority of Texas, right? I struggle when, as much respect as I have for Colonel Stephen McCraw, he is there for everything. If you're up there at the Capitol, it'll be like an education bill. And there he is, testifying. I mean, the man, and he takes those slings and those arrows, but he has mentioned several times that I've been there for in our state capitol, where he states, and I understand why, I don't want my men executing immigration law enforcement. I mean, right, wrong, or different.
FBI, didn't
I believe so. So, and I say that's the other reason, just like TMD or Texas Military Department, I can tell you, I'm not saying that it's not happening, but in my personal experience that I've seen over the almost 30 visits over the last 2 years, I have yet to see a Texas military guardsman actually arresting any illegal aliens. What I have seen, what I have documented, and what I have the receipts for is where they are aiding bringing them up across the river.
Yeah, I saw that.
So, and I say that, why? Because TMD is technically its own entity. However, for Operation Lone Star, they were put under the authorization of DPS. So also based off of my personal experience, what I've seen, I personally do not believe that a border protection unit or anything of the sort needs to be under DPS. I
Is
believe
something like that gonna happen then, probably, or no idea, or?
I'm holding my breath, because if you know where we are legislatively, the Senate has been working, has been passing a lot of really good, strong bills and resolutions, including SCR 23 from Senator Colker's, which is recognizing that we're in an unprecedented invasion and citing the Constitution, Texas and state, but or Texas and federal. I don't know. I'm not going to make any predictions at this point as to what's going to happen, because it's Austin. It's its own beast. We'll find out.
A couple of questions, and that sort of segues into one of my questions. And if you dance around this, I can totally appreciate why. The buzzsaw that you ran into in State Affairs last Wednesday with the border bills, for me, I expected out of the communist left. What really shocks me is that apparently I've got communists in my Republican Party as well, because they're not opening their eyes and actually doing the common sense legislation to pass. So obviously we got some serious stuff going on there. I wanted your perspective on the last Wednesday's affair, and my other thing is do you have any stats on how many Chinese men are actually in the Darien Straits being posed to come across?
So I was there last Wednesday and there Tuesday and came back home on Thursday. I was there till about 2 a.m. I actually testified neutral on HB 20, which is the big border bill, because of the issues that I had with it. But there, again, like you said, there's a lot of really good bills, other really good, serious serious bills. I'm gonna say that, serious bills. A lot of the good things of HB 20 are standalone bills. They're in other standalone bills.
Sorry to ask.
I cannot, I have been shocked, I will say this. I have been surprised by some that have voted certain ways, people that I thought would not have voted that way. And then I've also been shocked on the flip side of people who have voted again, in a good way, voted certain ways that I was shocked to have voted certain ways. There's no rhyme or reason. I cannot understand, and honestly, I really do think that a lot of it also has to, the feedback that they get from their own constituents. And that's what I love, when we say like the emails and the phone calls, and like, it really does matter. Because I'm there in their offices, and if all they hear are the constituents that are open borders, they think, I mean, they can only go by what they hear.
Do they read the committee reports and the stuff that gets put on the committee reports if we comment on TLO?
I
Or
do
they
not
just
know about
bypass
that. I do not know about that, if you want me to be honest, I don't know.
Very
But phone
interesting.
calls and emails, they do, especially your own like me coming to from Alliance from State Texas. If I'm coming in, and a lot of them, you know, they have asked me to come and testify in support or ask my opinion on things, and I've helped with some verbiage, I brought up some concerns. And I appreciate that, but I'm much more powerful, and I say I'm much more powerful if I've got a team of their own constituents following up with phone calls and emails saying, hey, maybe pay attention to what this little stay-at-home mom is saying, you know, because that's the same thing that we want. So it's going to be they're much more likely to respond to someone like y'all than they are for me.
Dairy Straits, Chinese guys?
Oh, I do not know the stats. I have not looked at the number of Chinese recently off of CBP of how many have been apprehended, but I am not aware or cognizant of a way to be able to find out how many are actually going through the gap. I can tell you from like Michael Young last night, when we were guest speakers on the Twitter space, who was there. I mean, they're saying like it's substantial. It's a lot. It's
Workland had a video on it, and it looked like a few hundred, and I'm thinking if I saw a few
Every
hundred,
day.
that means there's probably a few thousand.
every day.
Every day.
Every day. And that's the thing that I will say that I have seen Chinese nationals crossing from the very beginning. From a month after, like I said, after the Biden administration took into office. So it's not anything new, but again, it's the scale. They know May 11th is coming. We have seen nothing yet. Let me make that clear.
Well, he said
We haven't seen anything yet. Yeah.
What do you expect?
And I wish that there was a way to be able to I don't know a way. If there is, I'm not aware of it, sorry.
It is more than evident, and Abbott knows, and he has the power to close. He knows we're having a debate. Everybody knows this. I mean, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to see that we've got this happening. We're going around in circles, creating all these bills, going through all the extra, when the easiest thing to do is close the border. So have you spoken with him? Have you had any kind of connection with him, or know of anybody who has? Because he hasn't done his due diligence to make sure he's securing that southern border from anybody entering the country.
He avoids it.
Yeah, he tries to circumvent anybody in any shape, way, or form who comes at him with any kind of question regarding the border, and then everything is just smoke and mirrors every single time he goes down to the border, like if he's actually doing something. We know he hasn't done jack crap, because it's been a few years already. Enough of the nonsense. This is maddening. Our children are suffering for it, women are suffering it. I've come to personally know women that have actually walked pregnant with child from Peru all the way to America. And thank God nothing happened to her, other than she passing out after days, but still, all in all, have you had that conversation with anybody up there to make this change? And if so, why hasn't he done it?
I wish that Governor Abbott would actually meet with me.
He won't.
I have not been, I know that there are a few that follow me on social media from the office. I will say, in the context and in being fair, the state of Texas, our state legislators and the governor, has technically done more than any other state has been forced to do. I will say that, being fair. No, well, on the border. with Operation Lone Star. However, I will also say, I was there, and I know I was just telling you about that, I was there in Del Rio when he had the first border security summit and actually pretty much laid out Operation Lone Star. I was there, I was present. I know what happened and what was told to the private landowners in the meeting when the cameras were turned off. I've been there in Eagle Pass when my phone was blowing up, when all of a sudden people are going, hey, Governor Abbott is sending Humvees and shipping containers down there. And I'm like, I'm 20 minutes up the street, let's go for a ride. I can tell you, I know what I know, I know what I've seen, I know what I've witnessed. I can tell you a lot of that razor wire and that temporary fencing, it's so overgrown, they just put wet clothes over it. There's a lot there, everything that Operation Lone Star has done, and it's at no fault of our brave law enforcement that are at the front lines, is consequential. None of it, I've never, not one time have I seen any DPS, Texas military, or the like out there actually repelling anyone from coming. Not once. Like I said, I've quite the opposite. And there's been a number of times where even to reporters where they have become hostile, I have been threatened to be arrested several times by our Texas law enforcement for simply being out there reporting. When there's crowds of men coming over. So I agree with you. I think that Governor Abbott, in my opinion, is reactive. I think that he's gotten to the point where photo ops is no longer going to work because enough Texans have realized that those are just that, photo ops. I will, however, in fairness, also say that this is unprecedented. And I think that he is, and it's not just him, Texas officials in general are afraid because this is an unprecedented response that we are trying to tell him to do. It's never been done before. That's not saying because when the federal government fails to uphold its duty to protect its citizens, the states have to do so.
Exactly.
A lot of money has been spent. I think until we actually stop, by that I mean start actually deporting.
They can't
Or close
legally,
the funnels.
they can't legally do that.
Describe the
Well,
funnels.
They can if an actual invasion has been declared.
Right.
However, one of the other things that to that point that he did for a week time span was applying pressure. Like, Texas has the 9th strongest economy in the world. In the world. We have several ports of entry right here. Texas does have the power of the purse, and I understand that it's very difficult when we're talking about maintaining relationships with our trade partner, Mexico. One of the things that made President Trump's policies so great and effective was the tariffs that he threatened to put on. So how do we, as a sovereign state, apply that similar type of pressure? Because again, if you're just talking about, if you think about it from some people who make really stupid comments thinking like, oh, well, we're just gonna send all of our troops down there along the border and just start shooting, that's stupid and dumb and reckless, and it's gross. It's grotesque that you even suggest such a thing, okay? I don't think that people understand what they're even, regardless. One of the things that I would advocate that he did for a week time span was when he talked.
And they don't.
Or to be too late.
So we have to start doing the same thing. Our lawmakers have to start doing things that push the laws and make the courts decide these questions.
I agree with you, and in other conversations, when I first started this out, I'm like, gosh, just shut this down. I do believe, again, because he is reactive, I know that the governor's office has been working with a lot of the legislators on some of these bills and resolutions. I believe that he is attempting, because this is unprecedented, I believe that his office, and I'm not trying to make excuses because I'm one of the #1 critics of the things that I've seen personally, but I do believe that he is right, wrong, or indifferent, not that I personally agree with it. I do believe that he's attempting to pass, to build a constitutional case that when we finally try to do something substantial, of substance, actually do something, that when it immediately gets kicked to the Supreme Court, that we have a better chance as a state to have standing. A lot of the Supreme Court cases with regards, not just from Texas, but from Florida and other states with regards to border-related stuff, have actually been going in our favor. So I agree, this should have been done from the get-go. A lot of this stuff should have been, we should have had a border protection unit, because Texas has always had to deal with a porous border. Always, it's not new. And again, we've had, under President Trump, the climate was right. Why didn't we have a lot of that border wall built? There's several different reasons, but I agree with you. I'm just saying, from what I see from the political angle, I think that he's trying to build that constitutional buffer, if you will. I agree with you, but I'm just saying that's what I see.
We've got time for a couple more questions. Go ahead, sir, and then we'll get.
Hey, how's it going? My name's Rick. I will say this, as a truck driver, to what you were saying about inspecting trucks when they come over here, it is actually constitutional what they're doing by DOT standards, because I don't know if any of you in here are truck drivers, but the most unconstitutional place you pull into is a weigh station. But my theory, what Governor Abbott is not doing that anymore is he's a big business Republican, not a true conservative. So all he cares about is how many companies stole from California. But as for, in support of what you're doing here, I remember about 3 years ago, I was coming out of San Antonio heading to, Bryan? And we were on a 2-lane back road, and DPS had the road shut down because they were unloading a whole bunch of immigrant children out of the back of a shipping container. Thankfully, they were all alive, but we're talking kids 10, 15, sometimes even younger, and it changes you seeing that. It's horrible. I've worked in those containers in the summer. Thankfully, this is during the winter time, so the conditions in there weren't as bad, but it's scary. Your approach from a pro-life perspective on this is the way to do it.
All right, thank you. Sir, go ahead.
Okay, first off, I want to tell you thank you. You don't know how much we support. We really do believe in everything that you said today. Part of our problem is not knowing how to do what you're doing, how to get involved, how to do it. I know you talk about all the emails and calling our representatives out and talking to them, but a lot of that, in my opinion, our biggest problem is our government. Right now, it is totally not working per the Constitution. So we're trying to live and do things per the Constitution. They're not. They can care less about it. So we need to support you. We need to keep banging the drum. But our biggest problem is we've got to get our government back in control, because until that happens, you're going to put 100 times more effort into what needs to be done than in anybody else that wants to support you. So it's one of those things that we want to be there, we want to do stuff, and I will do the emails and whatever that you're asking for. We'd like to do more.
Well, to your point, and thank you for your comment very, very much, and I do agree with you. And obviously, I have seen a lot, and it's changed me. And that's why I'm so passionate about it, right? I don't wear this band for no reason. There's a story behind this. It's personal. It's personal. It's personal at that point. So I appreciate your comments. I agree with you, and I think we need to start thinking different. Like when President Trump was in office, a lot of the things that people even with immigration, he was stopped by who? Yeah, the Democrats, but it's like you guys have said, that was expected, right? But by Republicans.
Yeah.
By Republicans. And this is the thing, when they're still in the mindset, and I know a lot of people have woken up to this, I know I have, and incentivize on the city, county, and state level and beyond, right? You cannot fuel and incentivize those things, but then say you want a secure border. You just can't. It's because they would not be coming if. So I say that too because then your local politics matter. I had somebody reach out to me and ask me for an endorsement for a college board, county college board. For a local community college. And when we sat down and had coffee, and I looked at her and I said, okay, so where do you see on immigration? If the community college is asked, for a proposal as to whether or not they want to allow, for non-citizens to be able to get some grants to be able to attend school here in the county, how are you gonna vote? Right? Your school boards, you start going to the school boards, all the mamas and papa bears that have been going to the school, start asking, throw them for a loop. Ask them, how many children that fall under the ESL category have been registered? How many non-English speaking students do we now have? Over the last even 5 years, let's pull that data. How much is that costing? Have any of our teachers or resources from what ISD school district is this? Okay, have any of our resources or teachers been sent to any of these influx facilities to go aid with unaccompanied minors that have crossed over the border? Ask those questions. Ask your local police chief, ask your local sheriff. Ask these questions on where they stand and help to back those, help to back a sheriff who's gonna re-implement 287G. Help to back a police chief that's going to start collecting. So I agree with you, because the thing with President Trump is that he was one man and one man alone. No matter who the president is, if we do not begin infiltrating from the bottom up and reassert our state sovereignty in all of these issues, or reassert our place locally on the city council, school boards, like all of this, they're not gonna be able to.
One last
Yeah,
comment on what you said. When they told you that they could not do it because they benefit from it financially, what they don't, the short-sightedness of people like that is that they're benefiting today. 5 years from now, guess what? You're bankrupt. So you got it today, but you're not thinking long-term. That's what I would always, that's what I always tell everybody when it comes up to something.
Absolutely agree, and that's what I'm saying, we have to start switching our mind frame, our way of thinking
That's a problem.
in the conversations.
I mean, that's a problem with politics in general, because you look at Washington, everybody's so worried about short-term gain and not looking at what's happening long-term.
Let me just say that, let's just finish up with Sheena. She's done a great job with the presentation, and we appreciate everyone's questions and comments, but it is 8:30, and let's give her a